hides a bus driver. Who has to get involved? Believe it or not. What?
The police?
Higher than that,
That's
a little bit lower than that. The Attorney General of the United States, which was Robert Kennedy. He had to get on the phone with Greyhound and say, hey, Mr. Greyhound, these people by law have a right to transportation. You better get off your duff and find a driver, which he did, which he finally did. So the Attorney General of the United States had to take care of this thing and had to provide a driver, so to speak, had to go through his influence to find a driver. Well, they get on the bus, they drive to Montgomery, Alabama, they get off the bus, and they get the hell beat out of them again. Bats, clubs, kicked, punched. I mean, just get the hell beat out right as soon as they get off the bus. Now, Robert Kennedy, to make sure there wasn't any problem in Montgomery, sent a very close friend of his and one of his men that worked for him in the Justice Department by the name of John Siegenthaler. This is an example of kind of what the buses, treatment the buses got. Okay? And this is signed by him. All these are signed. But John Siegenthaler drives down in a car behind the bus, and he, believe it or not, he has a phone at that time that he can directly communicate with the Attorney General. And he calls the Attorney General as they come in, they start getting out the bus, and he tells the Attorney General, everything's quiet, and the next thing you know, all hell breaks loose, and these people just start getting the hell kicked out of them, including Siegenthaler. They pull him out of the car and beat the hell out of him too. Well, you think Robert Kennedy was very happy about that? No, he was very, very upset. And FBI agents and local police stood on, watched, and did nothing. Why? Well, no, they weren't too much. Because it was illegal to segregate there.
Yes.
Yeah, so they thought these people had coming what they had coming. You know, you can't protest segregation when it's legal, so they sat there and watched it. And Robert Kennedy was a very unhappy man, especially after one of his staff had held beat out of him too. But the point is the Freedom Riders were the first people to kind of take a stand in a protest on civil rights from the SCLC. Okay, the sixth reason why you should care about Martin Luther King is because of a person by the name of James Meredith. James Meredith. James Meredith was a black military veteran. He joined the Air Force immediately after high school, and he served his country from 1951 to 1960. Black man, joined the Air Force right after high school, served his country proudly for 9 years from 1951 to 1960. Okay? Protected your freedom. Not your freedom, but your grandparents' freedom for sure. Okay? Well, after his honorable discharge from the Air Force, what do you think Meredith did? He went to Jackson State College for 2 years. It was kind of a 2-year college in Mississippi. And who was it for?
Blacks.
All blacks. It was an all-black college. So after Meredith returns from his stint in the Air Force serving our country, he attends Jackson State College in Mississippi for 2 years, which was an all-black college. And after he finished those 2 years, what did he want to do? He wanted to transfer to a 4-year school. And guess where he wanted to transfer to? The University of Mississippi. Okay? Makes sense. So he applies for enrollment to the University of Mississippi to complete his degree after his first 2 years at Jackson State University. Well, guess what happened on September 20th, 1962? They denied his admission. Said he couldn't go there. Why? Because he was black. This is a guy, folks, that served in the United States Air Force for 9 years, protecting the freedom of the people that wouldn't let him into the college. It was so bad that the governor, Ross Barnett of Mississippi, personally prevented him from enrolling. Showed up at the campus and personally prevented him from enrolling. The governor of the state of Mississippi, Ross Barnett. So on September 20th, 1962, James Meredith was denied admission at the University of Mississippi. He was personally prevented from registering for classes by Governor Ross Barnett. Who got involved? Who? Who got? Higher.
The president.
Yeah, the president gets involved. President Kennedy personally calls Barnett and says, you will let him in. You are getting a direct mandate from the President of the United States. You will enroll him. And Barnett argued with him, but you can't win an argument with the president. So he was allowed to enroll, which led to riots. You'd like to think it led to more people. It eventually will, but it led to riots, violent riots. It got so bad that President Kennedy had to send in federal troops to restore order. 5,000 federal troops, military personnel, to restore order. Can you believe that? So one black man gets to enroll at the University of Mississippi, a guy that served his country for 9 years, and when they let him in, it gets so bad in the rioting that 5,000 federal troops have to be sent in to restore order. But Meredith remained at the college. There's a great picture of him right here, great picture. Meredith off to enroll, Barnett action blocked, James Meredith. This is the guy right here, the man who was denied admission. So he goes to class, escorted by federal troops. Can you imagine federal troops because nobody wants you there escorting you? Can you imagine walking into this school, you're the only, let's just reverse the roles. This is an all-black high school. You're the only white person here, and you're being escorted to your classes by federal troops, not police officers, not sheriff's detectives, federal troops with arms. Can you imagine? I mean, seriously, that's what it was like. Okay, the next reason then why you should care about Martin Luther King Jr. is the University of Alabama. The University of Alabama. On June 11th, 1963, Alabama Governor George Wallace personally prevented 2 Negro students from enrolling at the University of Alabama. On June 11th, 1963, this was after the Meredith issue, Alabama Governor George Wallace personally prevented 2 Negro students from enrolling at the University of Alabama. He actually stood in front of Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama and made a public statement that you might find hard to believe. So on June 11, 1963, Alabama Governor George Wallace personally prevented 2 Negroes from enrolling at the University of Alabama. He stood in front of Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama, which is the most significant building on the campus. He stood there in front of everyone. There was a lot of people there, and he said, quote, he promised, quote, segregation in the state of Alabama today, tomorrow, and forever. Now what happened back with that Supreme Court decision back before? What did they say? That all Alabama federal and local laws were unconstitutional. They could not segregate. But by God, George Wallace didn't care. He promised segregation in the state of Alabama today, tomorrow, and forever. Well, what happened? The president sent in federal troops and federal marshals. Now, what did he do that was different? Because I haven't got to it yet. What did he do out of order? What did he do that was different from last time? Okay, they admitted James Meredith, and then they had riots, and they sent in troops.
He didn't wait for the riots.
He sent in the troops before they admitted the 2 students. So they were prepared, which led to no violence. So, once Kennedy sent in the federal marshals and members of the Alabama National Guard, Negro students Jimmy Hood and Vivian Malone were admitted to summer classes without incident. So Kennedy learned from the first one, didn't he? Send in the troops before you make the decision. If they're standing there, you're less likely to riot than if they're not there, okay? So Wallace stood aside when he was confronted by federal marshals and members of the Alabama National Guard, all sent in by President Kennedy. Let's see if I can find this picture. Right here. This is George Wallace at Foster Auditorium. These are federal marshals. This is Nicholas Katzenbach, who was Kennedy's representative. He was the Attorney General. This is known as a stand at the schoolhouse door. When Katzenbach came to Wallace and said, you will, on orders of the President of the United States, let these 2 students in. Wallace stepped aside, kids came in, registered, went to classes. This is a signed signature of Nicholas Katzenbach. Here's George Wallace right here. We got it all. We got it all. Yes? Jimmy Hood and Vivian Malone. Okay, the 8th reason why you should care about Martin Luther King Jr. was the Birmingham church bombing. Birmingham church bombing. On September 15th, 1963, after King's I Have a Dream speech, by the way, on September 15th, 1963, one of the worst crimes of the Civil Rights era occurred at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. On September 15th, 1963, one of the worst crimes of the Civil Rights era occurred at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. A bomb exploded at the church that Sunday. A bomb exploded at that church, at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. 20 people were injured. 4 young girls, all under the age of 14, who were attending Sunday school that day, were killed. 4 young girls, all under the age of 14 years old, who were attending Sunday school that day, were killed. They catch the person that did it, or persons? Not initially, but 14 years after this crime, they convicted a man for it. So they never gave up, which was a good sign. But the point I make is that Martin Luther King said publicly that he knew that his dream that he talked about at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial earlier that year certainly were far farther away than he assumed they would be when they blew up a church and killed 4 young black girls. Now, how would you like to be the family of the Collins family, who one of your daughters was killed and the other one was blinded in one eye for life? That's what happened at the Birmingham Baptist Church. Okay, this is going to be perfect. The 9th reason why you should care about Martin Luther King was black power. Black power. How many people have heard of black power? Okay, what's the number one, when you think of black power, what's the number one picture in your mind you think of? Yep, that picture right back there of Tommy Smith and John Carlos protesting at the 1968 Olympic Games. And we'll tell you that story next year. We just covered that. Just covered that in the class, the other class. Okay, that's the black power sign. Okay? Now what happened is after some of these things that were happening, and young Negroes especially were thinking, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., we respect him, but his nonviolent approach isn't doing much for us. We're still getting the hell beat out of us and fire hoses shot on us and everything else, blowing up churches. So finally in 1966, a young black radical by the name of Stokely Carmichael became the new radical civil rights leader of a group called the Black Power Movement. So in 1966, because they were pretty much being tired of being pushed around or continued to, they didn't see King making a lot of progress, a new, younger generation of Negroes looked toward a guy by the name of Stokely Carmichael to start what was known as the Black Power Movement. And one time when Carmichael was speaking about this movement, he said, we've been saying freedom for 6 years and we ain't got nothing. What we're going to start saying is black power. And that's where the term came from. Now, when you think about Martin Luther King's nonviolent philosophy of the civil rights movement, Carmichael was asked about that. Well, what about this nonviolent movement? He goes, you know, I'll paraphrase. He said, we've always seen that as just a tactic, not a philosophy. That was just one way to handle the civil rights movement, was the nonviolent approach. We're going with a more radical approach. Martin Luther King thought it was the most dangerous thing that could ever happen to the civil rights movement was black power. Because what famous militant organization did black power lead to? The Black Panthers. Okay, Bobby Seal and Huey Newton started a very radical group called the Black Panthers. Matter of fact, Huey Newton said publicly one time that he thought political power came through the barrel of a gun. So this was a completely different philosophy. And I don't want you to write this part down. If you want to get it off the video, you can. But I want to tell you the difference real quickly between Martin Luther King's philosophy of civil rights and black power. Martin Luther King believed in nonviolent approach, right? Black power believed in armed self-defense. Okay? Martin Luther King Jr. believed in integration of blacks and whites, right? Black power believed in separation of blacks and whites. Martin Luther King believed in working with the system. You know what that means, working with the system? Even though you don't like it, you're going to work with it, try to make things better. Black power believed in preparing for revolution. And finally, Martin Luther King believed in including white people in the civil rights movement, right? Black power thought you should totally exclude. Okay? So you're going to see a polar opposite philosophy on that. And the 10th reason why you should care about Martin Luther King Jr. was the most tragic. What do you think that was? His assassination. Very good, Monica. His assassination. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was always a little bit fearful of his life. I mean, every place they went, they had bricks thrown at him. You know, they were shot with fire hoses, beaten. And lots of times he wouldn't join the group because, and not because he didn't want it, but his aides would say, no, you need to back off because we're afraid someone's going to hurt you badly or kill you. So there were some protests that he didn't even go to. Well, in late March of 1968, he decided to travel to Memphis, Tennessee because he wanted to support a strike by black sanitation workers, garbage men basically. And they were demanding better pay and better working conditions. And so he travels to Memphis, Tennessee in late March. And the night of April 3rd, he gives a very moving speech at the Masonic Temple there in Memphis, just like he always did, in support of these black black sanitation workers. Now I want you to tell me what you get out of this part of the speech. Just want you to listen. This is what he said toward the end of the speech. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He has allowed me to go to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And he walked off. The next afternoon, as he stood on the balcony of his motel, talking to some friends below, a single shot rings out from across a open parking area or parking lot. At 5:30 in the evening, a single shot rings out and hits hits King right in the neck, tearing off the right side of his jaw. One shot. So as he is stepping outside the balcony of his motel to get some fresh air in Memphis, the next day after his speech, he's standing alone on the balcony. He's looking down upon some friends, talking to them, and at 5:30 p.m. a single shot rings out from across a vacant lot, hits King in the neck, tearing away the right side of his jaw. He was rushed to a local hospital where they tried desperately to save his life, but at 7:05 p.m. he was pronounced dead at the age of 39. And what was set off all over across America? Rioting in the bigger cities. Chicago, Washington, D.C. were the biggest ones. There was also a lot of Negroes listening to Robert Kennedy's speak in Indianapolis because Robert Kennedy was running for the presidency. This is after his brother was assassinated. And Kennedy was giving a speech to a large group of black people. And he ad-libbed, and I can give you a copy of this if you want. When he heard the news to the people, he ad-libbed a speech you just can't believe right off the top of his head. And talked to people about how tragic this was, but how pleased not to overreact. And he said this. He said, I once want to read this part to you. We're not done yet, so let's not be shuffling. You guys normally just shuffle, make up your own mind when you're done. For those of you that are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I also can feel in my own heart the same type of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man also. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond those rather difficult times. So he asked them to go home and pray for the King family and pray for America. Was there a riot in Indianapolis after the speech? No. He probably saved one, and it was just ad lib. But the death of Martin Luther King Jr. really, really was a tough thing. Okay, and he ended up being the martyr for the Union, for the movement. And he probably is more famous in that death than maybe he would have been if he lived, same as President Kennedy. But he was an important man for civil rights, and without his efforts, if you ever watched, and whether you like President Obama or don't like him, if you watched his first acceptance speech, there were black people crying because Martin Luther King would have never believed he had never seen an African-American president that soon after his movement. So, anyway, good job. We'll see you down the line. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you want any part of this that you missed, it'll be on the video tonight on our website.